The silence in Grandma's house wasn't empty. It was layered, like sediment at the bottom of a deep, still lake. 60 years of it had settled into the very bones of the old Victorian, into the grain of its oak floors, the sigh of its staircases, the way the light fell in thick, dusty shafts through the lace curtains in the parlor. We, her grandchildren, knew the outline of the story the way you know a faded, alarming stain on an otherwise beautiful Persian rug. Something terrible had been spilled here long ago, but no one lifts the corner to examine the damage beneath. You just learn to walk around it. The official story was a cornerstone of our family's history, a dark, immutable fact. It was etched not only into the brittle police records tucked away in the county courthouse, but into the very DNA of our small, Midwestern town's gossip. Our grandfather, Robert James Hawthorne, in a fit of unforgivable rage over his only daughter, Lily's desire to marry a man from California, liberal arts student, no less, had killed her. He'd strangled her, the story went, in the very boathouse by the lake where she'd played as a child. He was arrested at dawn, still sitting on the damp dock, her favorite blue hair ribbon clutched in his fist. The trial was swift. Robert, a man known for his temper and stubborn pride, offered little defense. He was convicted of second-degree murder and spent 15 years in the state penitentiary. He died of lung cancer less than a year after his release, a gaunt, broken stranger who came home to die in the room above the garage. Grandma Eleanor, the dutiful, shattered widow, raised their two remaining sons, my father, Michael, and my uncle, David, in the long, cold shadow of this infamy. She became a monument to stoic respectability, a woman defined by a tragedy so profound it rendered her almost saintly in her quiet endurance. But even as children, we sensed a dissonance. Grandma's eyes, the color of weathered slate after a rain, held a secret gravity that never quite aligned with the story of the betrayed, devastated wife. She never spoke ill of Robert. Not once. When his name was mentioned, usually in hushed, pitying tones by older relatives, her hands that mapped a lifetime of kneading dough, tending gardens, and holding crying babies in their wrinkled topography, would still, not with clenched anger, but with a profound, listening stillness, as if she were hearing a distant song only she could perceive. She kept his photograph on her dresser, not hidden in a drawer, a young, sharp-jawed Robert in his army uniform, smiling with a confidence that seemed to belong to another universe. The truth, like a seed long buried under concrete, began to split its shell the summer I turned 22. The old Victorian, Grandma's house since her marriage, needed significant repairs after a particularly violent spring storm. The roof leaked, and water damage had crept into the attic. I was between college and my first real job, so I volunteered to help the contractor, mostly by clearing out decades of accumulated memory. The attic was a time capsule, hot and suffocating, smelling of cedar and decay. It was a landscape of shrouded furniture, steamer trunks plastered with destinations like Shanghai and Marseilles, and countless cardboard boxes labeled in my father's childhood scrawl, XMAS deck, Mom's books, MISC. I was moving a particularly heavy box of National Geographics when my shoulder brushed against a baseboard near the dormer window. It gave way with a soft groan of protesting nails. Crouching down, I shined my phone's light into the dark cavity. There, wrapped in oilcloth that crackled with age, was a tin box, the kind that once held expensive biscuits. It was cool to the touch and unnaturally heavy. My heart began a slow, hard drum against my ribs. This was not misplaced. This was hidden. I carried it down to the kitchen, where Grandma was shelling peas at the table, her movements rhythmic and precise. The afternoon sun caught the silver in her hair, turning it into a halo. I placed the box before her. The quiet clunk it made on the pine table seemed to stop the very air in the room. She looked at it for a long moment, her hands pausing over the bowl of green pearls. Then she looked at me, and instead of the shock or anger I feared, a strange, resigned calm settled on her face, smoothing the lines around her eyes. It was the look of someone who has been waiting for a train they knew was inevitable. "So," she said, her voice the soft rustle of a dry leaf skittering across stone. "The old place is finally giving up its ghost." She didn't open the box. She simply nodded toward it. "You found it. You should see what's inside." With trembling fingers, I pried open the rusting latch. There were no jewels, no stock certificates, no pressed flowers. Instead, there was a stack of letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. And beneath them, a small, cloth-bound diary, its blue cover bleached pale with time. The letters were addressed to my dearest Eleanor in a strong, slanting script that grew progressively weaker, more spidery, over the pages. The postmarks were all from the state penitentiary, Robert's prison letters. The diary had a small brass lock, but it was broken. A single hair was tucked into its pages, a strand of vibrant, coppery red Lily's hair. That night, after the contractor had left and the house was swallowed by the deep, country darkness, Grandma lit the old green glass lamp on the side table in the parlor. She motioned for me to sit in Robert's old armchair, the leather worn smooth in the shape of his body. "Read them," she said, her gaze fixed on the window, where moths batted softly against the screen. "Then we'll talk." The letters were not what I expected. They were not proclamations of innocence, not raging against an unjust world. The early ones were waves of pure anguish, apologies that cracked the paper with their weight. "My dearest Eleanor," the first one began, dated just a month after his sentencing. "They tell me I should repent. The chaplain says I must seek God's forgiveness for taking our Lily's life. But how can I repent for a sin I did not commit? And yet, a darker thought haunts me. Perhaps it would be easier if I had. If these hands had done the deed, born of a father's twisted, possessive love, then at least the act would have a source, a terrible logic. My rage would have been a father's rage. This is a void. I am drowning in a silence I did not create." Another, a year later, "I dream of her laugh. I dream of it more than I dream of her face. It was like bells, Eleanor. Do you remember? It would start in the kitchen and fill the whole damn house. This place has no laughter, only echoes. I am becoming an echo myself." And another, 5 years in, "I think of you raising the boys alone. Michael with his solemn eyes, David with his fire. Do they hate me? They should. Tell them to hate me. It will make it easier for them. It is the armor I can give them from in here. Let them believe the worst of me. It is a safer story." The pain in his words was a living thing, but it was a confused pain, a grief circling a dark, empty center. It wasn't the guilt of a murderer, but the torment of a man buried alive under someone else's crime. Then I opened the diary. The early pages were a sun-drenched meadow of a young mother's joy, filled with pressed wildflowers and notes in a looping, elegant hand. April 12, 1952. "Robert brought home a puppy today. A ridiculous golden ball of fluff. Lily is in love. She has named him Buttercup, which Robert grumbles about. But I saw him secretly feeding the little thing bacon under the table." July 4, 1955. "The boys are manning the lemonade stand. Lily, only 6, decided to be the charm and is dancing on the lawn. She charmed old Mr. Higgins out of 50 cents for a single glass. Robert is so proud he could burst. But as the pages turned, as Lily grew from a child into a young woman, a shadow entered the prose. It had a name, Silas. Silas Hawthorne, Robert's father. My great-grandfather. In my mind, he existed only as a stern, sepia-toned portrait in the hallway. A man with eyes like chips of flint and a mouth set in a line that suggested a perpetual distaste for the world. A retired state judge, a pillar of the community. A man whose word in our town was not just respected but treated as law. His presence in the diary was a cold draft. September 3, 1963. "Dinner at Silas's tonight. Lily wore the new dress. She made herself a modern shift, quite short. Silas did not say a word to her all evening. After, he took Robert into the study. I could hear the low rumble of his voice, like distant thunder. That girl is becoming wild. She needs discipline, not encouragement. Robert came out looking pale. He will not stand up to him. The war took the fight out of him in some ways, or maybe it was Silas who took it. Long ago, May 15, 1967, Lily has been accepted to Berkeley. She is over the moon. She wants to study literature. She showed the letter to Silas at Sunday lunch. He put down his fork so slowly the silence was deafening. "A factory for radicalism," he said. "You will not go. A woman's place is here." Learning to run a proper household, the fight that followed. Robert tried to mediate, but it was like watching a sapling try to stop a landslide. Lily left in tears. Silas sat, finished his meal, and told Robert he had raised a disrespectful chit. Robert just stared at his plate. The entries grew darker, tighter, the ink sometimes blotched as if by tears or rain. August 30th, 1968. Lily has met someone. A boy from her summer waitressing job at the Lake Lodge. Ben. He's from San Francisco. He's kind, and he makes her laugh in that way she hasn't laughed in years. She brought him by. He has long hair and spoke of social justice. Silas was there. It was a catastrophe. Ben stood his ground, which I think surprised Silas. After they left, Silas said to Robert, "You will put a stop to this. That hippie is a contagion. He will ruin her, and through her, this family's standing. We have a reputation." He said reputation like it was the Holy Grail. Then came the entry, dated 3 days after Lily's body was found. The writing was shattered, barely legible, scrawled across the page as if the pen itself were convulsing. October 7th, 1968. He came to me tonight. My own father-in-law. The house was asleep, the boy sedated with the doctor's medicine. Robert locked in the county cell. Silas let himself in. He stood in the doorway of the parlor, a silhouette of absolute authority. He didn't sit. He said, "Your husband is weak, sentimental. He would have let her go. Let her destroy everything we have built. That boy would have taken her to California, filled her head with filth, and she would have become a blot on our name. I have cleansed our honor." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't form a word. "You will say it was Robert. The police will believe it. He is hot-headed, known for his temper." He argued with her violently that afternoon. Half the town heard it. I am a respected man, a former judge. My word is truth. If you speak, Eleanor, if you even whisper a contrary tale, your sons will share their father's fate. They will be nothing, orphans of a monster. I will see to it. Their lives will be over before they begin. Then he held it up. In the lamplight, the handkerchief, the white linen one with the blue R. I embroidered for Robert's 40th birthday. He must have taken it from the laundry. It was stained. A dark, rust-brown smear. Oh God, it was stained. The diary fell from my hands. The room tilted. The cozy parlor with its doilies and family photos suddenly felt like a stage set. A meticulously maintained lie. I looked at Grandma. She was still gazing out the window, but her reflection in the glass showed tears streaming silently down her face, cutting through the powder on her cheeks. "He threatened the boys," I whispered, the words ash in my mouth. She nodded, a slow, painful dip of her chin. Michael was 12. David was 10. Their world had just been vaporized. Silas held what was left of it in his hands, and he was ready to crush it. I returned to the letters, frantically now, looking for Robert's side of the revelation. I found it near the end of the stack, a letter written on thin, fragile paper. "Eleanor, I found it. I was allowed home for a few hours, under guard to collect some things, before the transfer to the state prison. I went to Father's study, I don't know why. Maybe to rage at the ghost of him. I found the handkerchief here." Handkerchief tucked inside his old copy of The Decline and Fall. The stain. It was like a brand. I confronted him. He was in the garden, pruning his roses as if the world hadn't ended. I showed it to him. I said, "You did this." He didn't flinch. He laid his shears down carefully and looked at me with those cold, dead eyes. "I did what you lacked the spine to do," he said. "I preserved this family. She was a runaway gear, Robert. I removed her." He spoke about our Lily like she was a faulty part in an engine. I wanted to kill him. I think I screamed. I told him I was going to the sheriff, that I would tell them everything. He just smiled. "It was the most terrible thing I have ever seen." "Go ahead," he said. "By the time you get there, the narrative will already be set. The angry, disgraced father, inventing tales to save his own skin. My word against yours. A convicted murderers. Who do you think they will believe? And consider," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping, "what will become of Eleanor and the boys if you pursue this fantasy? Their association with you is a shame they may survive. Their association with a true monster, a grandfather who killed his own. Flesh and blood for pride that will eradicate them. I will make sure of it. I suggest you think of them, for once." He walked away, back to his roses. I stood there, holding the evidence of my daughter's murder and my own damnation. And I knew he was right. He had already won. The only move left was to contain the damage. The final letter in the stack was the shortest. It was dated the day before his trial began. "My Eleanor, I will plead guilty. It is the only way. A fight will tear what's left of our family to shreds. It will give Father a platform to destroy you and the boys. This way, the story is simple. It ends with me. You will be the brave widow, the boys the pitiable sons. There is shelter in that story. Let me be the walls of that shelter. It is the last thing I can give you. Do not mourn the man I was. Mourn our girl. Forgive the man I wasn't. Love our sons. Always. Are." I sat back, the weight of decades of this colossal, terrible deception pressing me into the old chair. The silence in the room was no longer layered with mystery. It was thick with understood tragedy. "Why didn't you tell?" My voice was a hoarse whisper, scraping the quiet. "After Silas died? After Robert was gone? Why carry this alone?" Grandma finally turned from the window. Her gaze was timeless, weary, stripped bare. "And then what, sweetheart?" she asked, not unkindly. "When Silas died of a stroke in 1980, Robert had been gone for 5 years. The world had made its peace with the story. My boys were men, starting their own lives, finally free of the Hawthorne shadow. To drag it all back up. To tell them their grandfather was a murderer, but not the one they thought. To make them question every memory, every moment of their childhood grief and anger. What would it have done to them? To your father." She reached over and touched the brittle page of her diary with a tender fingertip, as if soothing a wound. "I chose to keep my children alive in a world that thought their father a killer, rather than let them be devoured by a truth so much uglier. Silas took my daughter and my husband. I would not let him take my sons, too. Sometimes," she said, and here a flicker of something fierce, something unbroken, lit her eyes. "Survival is the quietest form of rebellion. But Robert," I choked out. "He went to prison for it. He died with that stain. He never cleared his name. A single, perfect tear, the first I had ever seen from her, traced a slow, deliberate path through the landscape of her cheek, following a well-worn groove hidden for 60 years. He made his choice too," she said, her voice steadier now. "It was a soldier's choice. A tactical retreat to save his platoon. When he realized his father's plan was set in stone, cemented by influence, money, and a town's willingness to believe the simpler, more sensational story, he saw the battlefield. He confessed to a crime he didn't commit to protect us. He knew that if he fought, if he denounced his own father, it would be a long, ugly, public trial that would tear the family's last shreds apart. And Silas, in his final, venomous act, would have found a way to ruin me and the boys financially, socially, completely. Robert took the blame onto his own shoulders to give us a shield. His sacrifice wasn't a confession. It was a barricade. And behind it, we lived. I finally understood. The silence wasn't shame. It wasn't complicity. It was a colossal, terrible love between a husband and wife that had been forced to become a fortress built not with stone and mortar, but with the bricks of a shared, unspeakable sacrifice. They had each swallowed a different poison, he, the venom of the world's hatred, she, the acid of the hidden truth to save the other, and their children from the greater, annihilating venom of Silas's evil. Grandma outlived them all, the cruel patriarch, the martyred husband, the lost daughter whose laughter had once filled these silent halls. For 6 decades, she had lived as the keeper of a truth too devastating to set free. She had tended its grim, guttering flame not out of morbid devotion, but so that we, the grandchildren playing on the rug with the unseen stain, could live in ignorance and light. She was the dam holding back a flood of ruin. The next morning, I found her in her rose garden, as always. The dawn light was pale and new. She was watering the hybrid tea roses, the ones named Peace, their blooms a soft, creamy yellow. The oppressive mystery that had hung over the house, over my entire understanding of our family, had lifted. It was replaced by a sorrow so vast, so deep, it was almost peaceful, a sea after a hurricane has passed. She saw me and gave a small, sad smile that held the wisdom of ages. Now you know why my silence was so loud. Sweetheart, she said, her voice clear in the morning air. She snipped a perfect rose and handed it to me. The thorns had been carefully removed from the stem. Some stories are not meant to be told. They are meant to be endured. So the next story, she said, looking at the house where my father's car had just pulled into the drive, his own grandchildren tumbling out of the back seat, their laughter sudden and bright in the quiet yard. So the next story can begin. And I realized then, holding that thornless rose, that my gentle grandma, who seemed to carry the weight of a tragic past in her slight, rounded shoulders, was in fact the strongest of us all. She had not just carried a secret, she had carried the crushing, hidden architecture of an entire truth, bearing its load so that our world wouldn't collapse under its weight. She wasn't a victim of the story. She was its solemn, unwavering guardian. And in her quiet endurance, she had written for us a story of survival, of love that outlasts even the deepest stain, a story just beginning to bloom.